What's up, everybody, and welcome back. Today I'm going to be running through a few things that people have been asking for a while and just starting to set up some distinctions and some points that you might want to know if you are considering switching to a completely liquid fertilizer program. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and roll that intro. So first things first, go ahead and hit subscribe if you haven't already, like it, leave a comment, ask questions, engage with the community, and that's really all there is to that. So I get a lot of questions about running a purely liquid program, and professionally, that's nothing new. A lot of people out there, a lot of companies nationwide have been running liquids forever and doing a great job at it. In my spray companies, that's what we always did, 100% liquid, no granular. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody is wired that way, and not everybody needs to be wired that way. I think that there is room for everything in this wide world, and we can all make it work. So you're out there, though, thinking about going to a completely liquid program, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're using any of the products that I manufacture. It could be anything else that's out there, but these are some good tips that you should be taking a look at. So the first one is going to be getting an awful lot of attention these days, and I think it's important to bring up. So a lot of the time, you can start out on any sort of fertilizer program with just sort of basic knowledge, buy something off the rack, put it out, and expect a result. It is the same with liquid as well. If you're going after NPK values, which we'll get into in a second, there are ways to get to what you need to get to in order to have the plant get what it needs for the season. However, there are instances where people are just overall depleted, and even if you are buying material off the rack, you might not be getting all of the nutrients that you need in order to have healthy turf. So this is where that whole conversation about soil testing comes in. I don't believe that you need to do a soil test, but if you want to advance and make sure that everything is happening the way that it's supposed to happen, you should get a soil test just for your own personal knowledge and at least a baseline on where things are starting. So once you have your soil test in hand, there are going to be some very good key pieces of information on there that will show you what deficiencies you have and what could be corrected either relatively quickly or over a length of time. So the thing about that and why this knowledge is really important is that there are certain nutrients that are going to be a little bit harder to get in full surplus supply by going with a liquid. And one of those is potassium, represented as the third number on the bottle or bag, or sometimes seen as K, or potash, or soluble potash, potassium. That's what we're talking about. So with that particular nutrient, you're going to have a hard time ever getting a liquid that's going to give you enough potassium to make up for any deficiencies that you may have in the soil. There are higher percentages available in liquids, up to 31%, that will work for foliar potassium, but it still will not give you the pounds that you need in order to really correct a soil deficiency. So for that very reason, soil testing is important. Again, do you have to have that to start on a fertilizer program? No, but if you continue to see issues with your lawn, it would be a good time to test and find out exactly what's going on. So if we continue moving up the numbers and we start talking about phosphorus for a second. Phosphorus is very available in liquid form. You can definitely get high enough concentrations in liquid form to get enough for the needs of the turf grass. And that is something that is absolutely readily available and an easy transition from granular to liquid just for that particular nutrient. If you do choose to get a soil test, or if you follow the general recommendations for turf grass across most schools and most of the country and most turf types, you're really only looking about 1 pound of phosphorus per 1,000 per year. Now, that number is definitely going to fluctuate based on where you live, and there are places who have plenty of phosphorus. There are also places with phosphorus bans and yada yada. Know your local ordinances before you go out putting anything you're not supposed to. So let's talk about nitrogen now, the one that everybody is the most concerned with, it would seem. So where people tend to think that there's a shortfall in the liquid side is, again, in the concentrations of the material that are going to go out onto the lawn. Even though you can get some relatively high amounts of nitrogen in a liquid form, it still seems to be a conversation. Nitrogen is very easy to get out through a liquid form and replace granular, and depending on what you are buying and what the liquid is, it is important to check to find out if there is any sort of controlled release nitrogen portion in the material, just to make sure that you get an extended feeding out of that liquid that you're applying. Now, you don't necessarily have to have that, but you need to plan on applying a bit more often if you don't have any sort of controlled release in that particular liquid. From a safety standpoint, it is nice to have a little bit of slow release in your liquids just to kind of buffer any potential mistakes you might make and sort of limit the chances of any burning. So now this leads us into something else. How are you going to apply the material? One thing I always tell people, if they're going for higher rates of nitrogen putting out in a liquid form, they need to make sure that they have enough carrier to get it down. Otherwise, you will run the risk of burning the tips of the grass or worse. So it is very important to know what type of equipment you're going to be using, whether or not you're using a hose end sprayer, which is fine, a backpack sprayer, also fine, a push sprayer, again, all fine, but all we're really looking for is finding out how much material can you put out without risk of burn. So with nitrogen applications, obviously making sure that you're not going to burn anything is very important. And the lowest rate that we would typically ever run anything with the carrier is about 1.5 gallons per 1,000 square feet out of a spray rig. Now, there are people that definitely are applying lower with different ride-on machines and things like that. But for most of you at home, you're going to be spraying something that's somewhere around 1 gallon and up to maybe 2 gallons a minute, depending on what you actually have. So if you're taking a look at something like a backpack sprayer, I would never apply more than about 1/3, maybe as much as 1/2 pound if it's got good controlled release nitrogen in it per 1,000 square feet if you're only using 1 gallon. Or if you do put it out at that rate, get out and immediately put water down so that you can minimize the risk of burn, and definitely watch the temperatures in which you are applying. All of those things can make a big difference in the safety of your turf. Another question I get is, what about hybridizing the whole system and doing a combo of granular and liquid? Well, hell yeah. I mean, that's a great way to go. I think that there are definitely strong suits to where liquids are going to stand out above your granular applications, and there are granular applications that may stand out against the liquid ones. And again, a lot of that from the granular side is going to be just able to get enough material down to get your soil nutrients back up into a surplus if they were deficient. So one thing to really pay attention to is, how much nitrogen do you really think that you need to put down in the course of the season? There are recommendations that are made by schools, as I said before. There are recommendations by turf professionals. There's a lot of different things you can look at. And it is important to note that the more you go up on your nitrogen, because it is sort of driving everything else along, it is going to pull more of your other macronutrients and some other minors with it. So the more you go up on your N, the more the demand is on your PK and so forth. So that's something to keep in mind as well. As you bring soil into a good balance and you get your nutrients down the way that they're supposed to and up into the levels that they're supposed to, and you're able to sort of back down on certain amounts and sort of get a more lower maintenance turf that's not requiring a ton of nitrogen, it will pull less out of the soil, and that actually will equate to using lower amounts of overall fertilizer over time. The nice thing about that is it starts to make liquids really appealing just because of the simplicity. I said simplicity. Why did I say that? Well, one of the things is it's actually pretty easy to do combos of other products in your tank when you go out and spray. That's one of the big things that people like about it, is the flexibility. If you need to put a fungicide in there while you're feeding, great. If you're going to do a broadleaf weed control application while you're spraying, great. Whatever you happen to have to put out at the time, you can get it out and you can get it on the ground without having to make multiple passes. And that is pretty nice. The other thing would be some of the availability of the foliar nutrients that you're applying as well. Some minor elements are going to do better just applied via liquid than they will in a granular form, and that's just kind of a nice little benefit as well, is like adding some additional minor elements into your tank and going out and spraying. So again, if I weigh this whole thing out and I look at it from as many different perspectives as I possibly can, and taking out the fact that I am a liquid fertilizer manufacturer, if I could take that and set it aside. Obviously, for the last 20 years or so, I have been doing liquid fertilizers and it works fantastic. However, for a lot of people, doing a combo is going to be one of the best things that they could ever consider. And for me, and for what I tend to recommend to a lot of people out there, is if you have a nice, strong granular program and you're very comfortable with it, but you want to do more, or you want to see more, or maybe your roots aren't doing, or whatever. There are so many different things that you can add in that you could just combo on with your granular program and just make everything more effective, stronger, denser, darker, better looking. So for pretty much everybody out there who wants to run that full liquid program, it isn't that difficult. It's not as daunting as it seems. And as long as you are hitting your timing right and feeding when you're supposed to, you will have an absolutely stellar lawn that will be the envy of the neighborhood. All you have to do is take a look back on what I did on my neighbor's lawn, click up here, and you can see what I did through the course of the season just using my own products and how I kind of had those out and moving. We're going to be visiting that lawn here very shortly as it's due for its first application. And I've already done its dethatching with that battery Sunjoe. So now we're going to be doing some more work to it until I get my own lawn back and installed. So that's really all I had for you today. Hope you enjoyed it. Again, make sure you're subscribed, and I'll talk to y'all real soon. See ya.